This is On Diversity, a podcast series by the Institute of Policy Studies, Singapore. This is the 4th season, and I'm your host, Liang Kaixin, Associate Director of IPS and also a former journalist. Today's episode is in conjunction with IPS's annual flagship conference, Singapore Perspectives 2024, and the theme is on youth, home alone, and adulting. We have Dr. Chu Han Yi, IPS Adjunct Senior Research Fellow, who is the lead researcher for Youth Steps, the first national long-term research conducted on youth in Singapore. We also have Klinsen Soh, the young guy who moved out from his parents' house before getting married. Welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I'll start off with a 2021 survey of about 1,000 Singaporeans by online property portal, Property Guru. It found that 77% of its respondents aged 22 to 39 are considering to move out from their parents' home in the next year, which is 2022, with most of them already saving up to buy a place. While it is frowned upon by some Singapore parents who see it as a waste of resources, so how can young people navigate this as their rite of passage to adulthood? Maybe we'll start with Klinsen's first because he moved out from his parents' place, and then we can ask him like, when and why do you decide to move out from your parents' house before getting married?
Right, okay. So I moved out of my parents' place in 2021. At the time, I was 29 years old and I had worked for about 4 years at a time. So I had some savings. And I had been living with my parents after my brother got married and moved out. So it was just me and them. And then so I stayed with them through circuit breaker, a lot of time spent working from home, and a lot of time with them also trying to get through working from home. And I actually was supposed to be posted out overseas in my previous role, but because of travel restrictions, a lot of that was cancelled. And then I had, this sense of nothing was progressing because every day I literally just see the same walls of my home, right? And I thought that I wanted to change the environment that I was in and to get a sense of like progress in my life, whatever that means. And a friend of mine approached me with the idea of, hey, would you like to rent a place together? And she was someone I trusted quite a lot. So I was like, okay, let's take the plunge.
Okay, that's very interesting. It's a female person?
Yeah. So it's a female friend from uni. And yeah, a lot of people raise eyebrows. So like when I tell them like, oh, okay, so is she your friend or is she like just your girlfriend, but you're shy? But no, it's just a female friend. So the arrangement was that we rented a whole place, and she had one bedroom and I had another bedroom. And we were both responsible for taking care of the common areas.
Wow, that's very cool. I hear your reasons, and I think it's a very common reason during COVID when a lot of people are working from home, and that's why some young people decided to move out from their parents' house. Honey, you did a study on youth steps. Could you tell us what are some of the reasons why these young people are deciding to move out, to rent instead of staying at their parents?
Let's talk about that survey first that started the conversation. That's that they talked to young people who were 22 to 39. And that is a very wide age range that includes young Singaporeans who are schooling, just starting to work, those in their late 20s, and even those in their late 30s who have been working for 10 years. I think while the survey says 77% are considering moving out, there's probably a lot of differences in this very wide age span. And their intent to move out may not always translate into real action. I think the motivations will be very different, fundamentally at the marital status. The singles and the marrieds would have very different motivations. Young couples would generally want a place of their own to start their own families. And the current housing incentives for married couples with children are very favorable in terms of application and subsidies. If they decide to rent, it's probably because they're waiting on their own flats, or they want to live near work or where their children's schools are. Singles, on the other hand, like Klinsen, would have very different practical concerns. If they are below 35, they can only rent if they want to live on their own. And
HDB, right?
Yeah, correct. Then we've heard from Klinsen that some of the biggest motivations of renting during the pandemic was they just needed to work from home. It's very hard to focus on the Zoom meetings when the parents is asking you what you want for lunch. Yeah, so that was the trend then. But I don't know about the property market that well, but I hear that the rents may have increased like 30%. So a lot of the young people might be boomeranging back to their parents' home. And this is not unique to Singapore. We see boomerangers in other countries where the rental market becomes crazy high and then they move back to their parents' place because it's just more sensible to do that. And we recall that Property Guru survey was done at the height of the pandemic. So I think if they did the survey now, the results might be very different.
Klinsen, did you move back to your parents' place?
Yeah, towards the end of my tenancy, me and my housemate, my friend, we realized that, oh my goodness, we saw the rent just double like before our eyes, like within the span of a year. And when your rent is 25% of your income, suddenly going to 50%, you start to think twice. But then at the same time, we both happened to get into serious relationships to the point where we felt comfortable possibly buying a home and settling down with our new partners. So we were quite happy to move back and then start saving for the down payment and the future to come. And I think there might be people who might think that, oh, it's a bit like shameful, like pies. You made a big move out and then like you went back. But surprisingly, our parents were quite welcoming, and then maybe they also appreciated the time away. And we came to a new status quo equilibrium of like how we live in a home. And we also learned to appreciate our parents more.
How much were you paying for your rent?
So I was renting in Toa Payoh, which is a very hot estate. And the landlord gave us a really good deal. So it worked out to be about 3,000 a month for an entire unit. But since then, if you are to go to 99Co or Property Guru now, something like that is going to become, I think at some point it became, I don't know, like 5,000 and then it dropped to maybe it's $4,300 now or something like that. So yeah, significant. Yeah, you could reduce the cost if you ask one more person to stay somewhere. But the point of renting out is for you to have your own space. And for many young people, having to share a room takes that away. The whole point of the whole thing. Yeah.
Honey, then what do you think about this then? When Klinsen mentioned about trying to save up for your BTO, right, or your resale flat and all, young people very worried about housing affordability according to Youth Steps.
So the short answer is yes. In general, when we ask young people if they're concerned about housing affordability, the majority would say yes, they are, to varying degrees of concern. But I have a longer answer to this because the Youth Step study follows the same young people over time. We also follow them in their different life transitions and how their views change because of different life stages. And what we found out was that if they remain single, their views generally stay the same, that housing is unaffordable in Singapore. Personally, I think it really doesn't help when the property industry or the property market and the media would highlight that, this HDBs are transacting at record high amounts. So it's $1 million here, it's 1.3 million there. Gosh, if you look at these amounts, no wonder young people think that housing is out of reach. Not all HDB flats are $1 million HDB flats. But I digress, right? What we found in the Youth Step study was that the young people who are married are comparatively less affected by the challenges of housing affordability. Qualitatively, when we talk to these young people and young couples, when they decide to start a family, settle down, and they go to HDB, and the magic thing that they do is they start on their spreadsheets. The spreadsheets, that spreadsheet, that magic spreadsheet that I hear so much about in terms of what they can afford, how much they have to finance, how much loans they can get. Their views actually temper quite a bit in terms of feeling that they can afford it. And because they can get different subsidies, and if they are married, they get, I think, priority queues and other subsidies. So comparatively, they are less concerned than the singles of their same cohort.
But that's also because they have double income, right? To help finance the flat, right?
Can I just give some numbers? Yeah, because I did the math.
Wow,
in
okay.
2021.
Sure.
So if I had, as a single, tried to buy, say, 700 square foot condominium on an affordable place, you would have been 1.6 million, and then the down payment for that is $400,000. And compared to if you say try to buy a 4-room, even now at all-time high prices, HDB, $800,000 with a partner, down payment is 200,000, and that's halved. So it's 100,000 is split between your cash and CPF, which most young people with some amount of time will be able to get quite easily. But for people who may not be able to ever buy a HDB, or at least until they're 35 years old, condominium is not tenable unless you're extremely high income.
Okay. Klinsen, there's been some talk about lowering the age limit of buying HDB flats, right, for singles from 35 years old to 28 years old. Do you think this will help singles like you then?
I speak from a place of privilege, and I certainly would have been able to afford, say, I don't know, a hypothetical 28-year-old BTO, and then I would probably go and live in it for a while, and I'll probably dispose of it and
get a profit.
Hopefully not.
Okay.
But if I get married, then a matrimonial home, want it to be slightly bigger, so it will not be of use to me at that point of time. But I think that for certain groups of people who don't live in very safe home environments, or people who are LGBTQ and cannot get married to the opposite sex, it will be quite beneficial for them, because 35 is not just, hey, you turn 35 and then that's when you get to move out. You turn 35 and you submit a BTO ballot, and who knows when it will be completed, right? I think a lot of us are still suffering from the trauma of construction delays, thinking there's a lot of hyperbole about, oh, you're only going to move in when you're 41, 42 years old, that sort of thing. In terms of meeting the needs of certain groups, and if, say, there was an increase in supply for maybe smaller flats targeted at singles or maybe small families, single mothers, that could help ease the wait times for these groups that might desperately need their own place to live.
Hani, what do you think about this then? Maybe in your own experience or from your friends and family?
I think the overall kind of support for housing affordability will always be favored towards young couples, families with children, because they have a greater need for that space. I think the ministry, MSF, have targeted schemes to help single mothers get their own place. So I think for the minority segments or targeted segments, there are interventions or policies that will support them in their housing ownership. But by and large, I think the policies are still going to favor the married couples, especially with children. And with the singles, I know that they are experimenting with pilot schemes for low-income singles and co-living. But for the middle income and higher income singles, I think if rental is an option, moving out their parents' house is an option, then it should be subject to the market conditions a little bit more.
Yeah, I think lowering the age limit for buying flats for singles, I think it's still a bit controversial, right? Because the government is still trying to encourage young people to get married and all that. And of course, if someone like Klinsen buys a flat at 28 and then suddenly found a girlfriend, suddenly got married, they'll be like, yeah, you have to figure out like what to do with the flat and how do you get the matrimonial flat, right?
Yeah, the regulation at that point would have to be important. Do you allow, for example, both husband and wife to own the singles flat? I don't know if you're going to call it single flat.
That's so not going to happen.
Exactly. And then there'll be intermediate times where you have to sell the flat and you've got to move in and things like that. I think it can be done, but it'll be difficult to prove that there's a disincentive, like for example, if you let singles buy flats earlier, that it will stop them from or slow them down from getting married and settling down. That's a bit contentious also. And I think that there are a lot of people, this is an outcome of us dating and marrying later also, who would eventually like to settle down in a matrimonial home, but that doesn't mean that they don't have needs and aspirations that need to be addressed within the next 5 to 6 years. And of course, we are a small country and resources are scarce. So it certainly makes sense to prioritize couples and families first. But if it is possible, then I think that's certainly an area which the housing policy can evolve as demographics change.
Maybe I'll just chime in here, which is I think Klinsen pointed out a good point, which is that it is because there's a scarcity of the housing that there are trade-offs to giving subsidies or supporting young couples versus singles. I mean, if we have abundance of housing, everybody gets a house. You get a house. Everybody gets a house. And I think what happens is, you're right. It shouldn't be that if you own a flat, you don't want to settle down. It's a matter of the scarcity rather than to fight that notion that if people or that assumption that if you own your own place, you won't settle down. In fact, if you own your own place, you might meet more people, right?
Yeah.
Find it easier to date, right?
Yeah. Oh my goodness, she has her own house.
That's very interesting. But I was thinking, is it generational also? Because like back in the days, I saw my aunts and uncles, they are quite happy staying together with my grandparents and waiting until they got married before buying their own place. In fact, I have one uncle who is still staying with my grandparents. They are like 3 generations living together. My grandparents, my uncle and aunt and their kids. Yeah. So is it very different now, the family structures?
Well, the family structures are definitely different. I think the extended families are less rare. It used to be that my grandparents, parents and me stayed in one house. And now everyone has their own home. But I feel that you don't have to live under the same roof to maintain a strong family relationship. Sometimes a little space and distance, like what Klinsen found out, can be healthy too. And throughout the years, going back to youth steps, one of the top youth aspirations is to have strong relationships with their families. And really, seriously, it's not like they're moving hundreds of miles away.
That's true. Singapore is so small.
So small. You can have your own place and still have strong relationships with the family and extended family. And then we know anecdotally that when young people move out, they still spend time with their family and on weekends have meals together or spend time with their extended family. And I've heard many stories, and because of my life stage, of how children will move back or spend more time with their parents when in their old age or when their parents need them to provide care.
Yeah, and I think you see that reflected in the demand for houses in mature estates where the parents who are now in maybe their 50s to 70s live. And I have a lot of friends who have made decisions such as like buying a home in the same block which their parents live, or at least the same estate. The same block was pretty extreme. It's like literally the same corresponding unit but downstairs. For some people that might seem like that's practically living in the same house. But at least for those people, it shows that they have a desire to continue to maintain the family bonds. Of course, not everyone has the experience of living with their parents/grandparents and growing up in a 3-generational environment. So for those people, that concept might feel a bit alien. And for the parents now who did have to live with their parents and their children under the same roof, it might come as a bit of a culture shock. Like, why are these young people, maybe not my children, but these young people are just moving out for seemingly no good reason. You have a perfectly nice home here. Like, why won't you stay near your parents? They love you and they care for you so much.
Yeah, this really reminds me of this Today article by this journalist, and she wrote a commentary that at 32, she moved out of her parents' flats and she learned to be independent and so much more. When we saw it on Facebook, there were so many angry comments. You can see all the parents, all the elderly complaining and scolding her and like, why are you wasting money on rent? Why are you like not giving the money to your parents instead? So why are Singaporeans so against the idea of the young people moving out on their own then? Honey, I see you smiling. You can answer first.
From their perspective, it's definitely waste of resources. But from the young people's perspective, it is being able to live comfortably on their own, creating a space and a lifestyle that they want. And it shows in the Youth Step study. Now, we need to remind ourselves that these are commenters on Facebook. And usually, yeah, that's right. When they comment, they choose to comment, it's usually because they have an axe to grind. There could be other people who are perfectly okay with their children moving out to find their own independence. And I think we maybe need to shift our views of this stereotypical Asian tiger parents who want to keep their cubs in their den. And I think our seniors nowadays are pretty active. They're active aging initiatives going out, and they have lives of their own. I know seniors who would be like out crack of dawn, spend time with friends and their own activities, and they don't need their children at home. So maybe that has that kind of the stereotype or the notion of that parent who want to keep their children at home needs to shift as well.
But Klinsen, when you were planning to move out and when you told your parents, did they react the same way also?
My parents are quite open-minded about these sort of things, and they have enough friends that they've observed similar things happening outside as well. I think my mom didn't take it as well as my dad, but then I think she was fine after I came back for dinner within the first 3-4 days of moving, right? I gave her the assurance that I'm not going away. Yeah, I'm not abandoning you, but it's just, I need the space. I think like one dimension that quite a lot of these young people are looking at is that in terms of physical age, they think about what their parents were doing at their age. Say they're 28, 29. They were having their own homes with the kids and managing their adult lives. And when you hit like 30, 31, I don't know if the 30, there's a psychological effect. Then you start to think, wow, I'm not there yet, but maybe I can be there yet if I just step out and move out. Yeah, but for the parents, and the kids need to help them understand that this is not necessarily a moral failing on their part. It's, oh no, I've scared my children away. I think most of the time, that's not the case, especially for people who live very comfortable lives with good incomes and things like that. And it won't be like forever. You know, life changes, and sometimes you move back to the house, and even sometimes if you get your own house and settle down, things can happen. Sometimes you need to move back, renovations, bad things happen in marriage, so on and so forth. But we should be open to adapting and seeing like what lies next in our own lives and that in our loved ones, right?
Yeah.
I think it's important to have choices, and let's not lock ourselves into one notion of housing arrangement for young people. Point of information, right? My roommate back in the university, he was from Austria, and he tells me that, hey, we are pretty much like Singapore. We stay, this is Europe, and they stay with their parents till their like early 30s, and it's perfectly acceptable in society.
Serious?
Yeah.
Wow.
We have been raised on a diet of American media.
Playing the US.
Yeah, where the children are expected that their parents are going to kick them out of their house at 18. So they have to be independent. And we've been raised on this media diet of when you're a young person, you should strike out on your own. You should, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you also need to move out and get your own place. There are other cultures in other countries where it is perfectly okay. And I think let's not lock ourselves into one or two pathways where you say, I must move out by X age. It really depends on the individual's circumstances.
Yeah. And I suspect if you interview the young people who say they wanted to move out, a lot of them may have so-called tasted the experience of living away from their parents, whether that's through NS or living in university halls or studying abroad overseas, or even as simple as overseas exchange for one semester. Right? Once you encounter that, and for some percentage of them, yes, that's going to be what they want, and they will work quite hard towards that goal. And for others, yeah, it can be a phase, or they realize, oh, actually, I'm fine, I'm comfortable, I prefer to live with my parents, I get homesick. Yeah, things like that. So there is this precedent, and which is not necessarily a foreign cultural thing, because also there are many cities in Asia where people move away from their hometowns and go to the big cities and like live away from their parents. Of course, in Singapore, we don't have that, but we do get exposed to these ideas from all sources.
So I think what you mentioned also, like actually young people did experience like living from their home when they are 18 or 20, when they are in NS or in universities or all that sort of things. But I guess it's more stuck when you hit 30 and when you feel like you're quite old, but you're still in your family home, right? And I think from Chua Bing Hua, a sociologist, right, what he said was that without the freedoms that often comes to be associated with adulthood, living in the family home beyond a certain age is like a permanent state of being children. So, Klinsen, do you agree with this? And how does renting on your own contribute to your own personal growth and independence?
Some parents will say, "Oh, you're forever my children," and that's correct.
I was going to say that.
No matter how old you are.
We are still the children of our parents.
Right. I think it's not controversial to say that when you live with your parents, you still have to answer to them for certain things that you want to do in your house. I had a discussion with a friend, and he said that after he bought his first house, he didn't realize, he didn't know how to decorate a home because the only place he'd been allowed to so-called decorate and buy furniture for was his own room. So that's maybe there are people who aspire to
and they suddenly need to
home.
start deciding which detergent to buy, which dishwasher to buy, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they follow Stacked Homes and other influencers and see them on their life journey and realize, oh, okay, this is something I want. And then for people who, I don't know, this is just my experience. I felt my ability to cook was quite poor. And my parents are a bit territorial about the kitchen. And
okay. A lot of Asian parents.
Yeah, so it's that journey of you having to do groceries and cook for yourself, experiment with new dishes, invite people over to try and have your own space. Yeah, during the pandemic, a lot of people could not go out to drink. They drank at home and then they experimented with all sorts of different culinary experiments. Yeah, whether that's be food or drink. And then when you have your own space, you can also come home anytime you like.
No curfew.
Yeah, no curfew. Because there are a lot of adult Singaporeans, particularly women, who they still have a curfew.
Are you serious?
Yeah, maybe even up to their 30s. So imagine if that happened to you. You'd be extremely irritated if your parents started texting you at about 10:30, 11, and where are you? And maybe you're even doing something as innocuous as doing overtime in the office. Yeah, all that worries cast aside. And of course, one of the big reasons is you can invite anyone you want to over, and there's no one to listen or watch you have sex.
I think that's a very big reason.
I think, just say it, right? Just say it.
Okay. I think that will help in a lot of young people get hitched also, in a way.
I hope whoever's listening to this, you feel vindicated. That it's not a weird idea. There are lots of industries built around that whole demand. And having your own space is quite comfortable. And you're going over to someone's place, right? And you don't have to worry that their parents are there. And say, you imagine you have to greet, hi uncle, hi auntie, and you go straight to the room. I've done that, and
you have done that,
and it's happened on the other side. So I understand the struggle, and if you had to pay $1,500 to avoid that, I think some people gladly would.
I have a less spicy story, but I think it resonates, and it's something I vividly remember when I was a younger adult living with my parents. I did my share of household chores, and I would often do the dishes because I also cannot cook. Not because I cannot follow recipes, but because I wasn't allowed to cook. So I would do dishes. And I would remember after doing my dishes, my mom would walk back into the kitchen and do them again.
Huh? Are you serious? Hey, I have a friend who had the same experience too.
Right. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because I don't do them as cleanly.
Yeah.
So after I got my place on my own, and I can do my dishes as cleanly or as not as cleanly.
However way you want, right?
However way I want it. In fact, then I pop them into the dishwasher. So, But I thought, yes, you get the independence, you get the privacy. I think in the quieter moments, you also learn to appreciate more of what you had at the parents' home, that familiar, the nostalgic food that the parents prepare. So I agree with Chua Beng Huat up to an extent, right?
Okay.
That is, you have to move out. You almost have to move out to understand what you had. And when I was spending time overseas, that was when I gained a lot of independence, a lot of freedom, a lot of privacy, but I also acquired an appreciation of what I have at home. And when I returned home, I also put everything was in a clearer perspective or more balanced perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone who moves out, I think, almost certainly gets homesick, which is very strange and weird. I'm living in Toa Payoh and my parents' home is in Bukit Panjang.
It's not that far
it's
away.
Not that far away. But you do sit and think as you are mopping the floor and things like that. Oh, okay.
I wish mom would do it.
I wish mom would do it. Yeah, and then imagine coming home to dinner It's not happening if you live by yourself, right? Unless your housemate is very nice, lah. But even then, not going to be everyday affairs. Yeah, like me and a lot of people and the people who I know who've moved out, like we've gained a deeper appreciation of what we enjoyed living with our parents. And yeah, it helps us build better relationships, and I think it also helped temper some of the friction that was built up over about almost a year of just like working from home and being exposed to each other a bit too much lah.
Yeah, but Klinsen, then what are some challenges that you or your friends met when you were living on your own then?
For me, it was mostly just managing the issues of just managing the house. For example, we had neighbors that threw down a lot of food waste at the, where you hang your laundry, which was very irritating because...
Like out of their window?
Yeah, out of the window. So
Okay.
there was one time I had shorts that were drying, and then there was I saw a jackfruit seed just lodged in the shorts because someone had thrown it down. And the place I had rented was quite an old flat, quite a few things go haywire here and there. So I had to figure out how to repair, how to put in an LED bulb in what used to be the slot for fluorescent bulb. It's not as straightforward as you think it might be.
Okay.
Yeah,
Be your own handyman.
Yeah, be your own handyman. And yeah, there are also the issues of increased cost of your food because you have to pay for everything yourself. And it's not often cost effective to eat or cook on your own as compared to if you are living with your family. Right. So then, and I felt that a lot as I was grocery shopping, and I was just thinking to myself, oh my goodness, I need to spend 1 hour to cook, 15 minutes to do the dishes, just so I can save $2 or $3 on a per meal basis. So that was the kind of challenge that was going through my head, and it made me think, oh my goodness, I had it so good when I was living with my parents.
Do you eat out a lot in the end?
I would say I mostly ate out half the time. So I would cook, say, one meal and eat out the other half of the time. But because I was living in a more central area, I actually had more time to meet friends. So that was one of the unintended side effects for me. So significant rent expenses, increased food expense. So that dented my savings a little bit, not too much, but at least I was still able to save some money. So I think these are the primary challenges. New home environment and increased expenses, yeah. But maybe that's offset by better mood.
Better mood. Okay. So I think just now we also touched on a little bit, but maybe we can expand on this. How can the government or the housing authorities adapt to these changing housing preferences for young people? Are there policies in place to support them, to provide affordable and accessible rental options for this demographic? Is co-living a viable option?
I would say that I considered co-living, but I realized after my friend had approached me that I really needed to live with someone that I trust to be responsible and to clean up the house. So me and my friend, we both got COVID separately during our times renting. We had to take care of each other lah. And you can get that with tenants you meet for the very first time, co-tenants you meet for the very first time, but these are complete strangers and you're rolling the dice on that. It's not easy to create a new policy or allocate significantly more resources to, say, increase the pool of rentals unless we move away from the current model where rental flats are mostly seen as a means of uplifting the destitute and the disadvantaged. If it makes financial sense for the organization, maybe it can be tenable, but a lot of research would need to be done to support the hypothesis that if you provide maybe say more two-room flats or more rental options for a certain group of Singaporeans, that it balances out in the end.
I think Singapore prides itself on high home ownership for its citizens. I think that's the grand kind of narrative and policy direction, and it has been, or strategy that has been pursued for decades. So I don't think that will go away. In fact, I think that moving towards or continuing on this path of home ownership for citizens, it's a wise thing to do, because I've seen in other countries where they are almost subject or held hostage to the rental markets or what's available in the housing market. But if you own your own home, you are less subject to these volatility and these fluctuations in the market. So I think encouraging and supporting Singaporeans in their home ownership aspirations should continue to be a priority. And I agree with Klinsen. I think where we have targeted rental options, it is really for the less privileged members of our society, or we're trying to uplift, trying to help certain groups of Singaporeans do better or help them in their transitions. And then the in-between, the rentals, and it's quite transitional, at least in our country. Right? It's transitional as in they rent, but we hope that eventually they will be able to own their own homes.
Yeah, and I agree, because I think for most people, the long-term goal really is to have your own space where you can relax and do what you like without being subject to the rules of someone else who's setting it, right?
Your landlords, right?
Yeah, you get me, whether it's your landlords or your parents, I don't know. But, yeah, so maybe I'm not sure if there needs to be new financing options for the less well-to-do, or there could be a smoother pipeline for people who know for reasons that they're not going to get married or have children to be able to own their own homes earlier in their life, so they don't feel they have to go through a period of like transitional struggle, say having to rent 5 years too. And then all that money doesn't go into equity, right? It goes into a landlord's pockets. And for the people who are like very money-minded, that's like crazy. So yeah, definitely at a policy level, there can be additional support. But if it doesn't pose a significant harm to all these people who have demand for these houses, then may not be moved so easily.
I think there's a call for being more inclusive, right? Yeah, for those people who have decided very early on that they can't get married in the conventional sense. So how are they going to afford housing, and maybe there's some way to help them in some sense.
One last thing I like people to consider when they think about all these young people renting is buying a home is one of the biggest financial commitments of your life, right? And sometimes there's a lot of uncertainty when not just with the partner that you're buying with, but also just like the place and the environment. And renting can be a low-risk way to experiment with the mix of amenities and environment without having to take on significant upfront costs and these like property tax and a lot of other things. And because maybe some people, they want to do it right, first time they're not interested in flipping the houses as much, they may need the experience of actually being out there and living somewhere else to understand what they really need in their own forever home.
That is true. And also I think we can't assume that everyone has a very good family relationship with their parents, right? There are also quite a lot of individuals who are not in good terms with their parents for some reason or other, and might need to get away to a place where they can call it a safe space, right? Yeah.
Currently, there are a lot of social welfare organizations that fill the gap. So it's them and the private market. So if there is some sort of public option to at least help people transition for a reasonable period of time, like 2 years or something, and towards the path of eventual home ownership, I think a lot of people would greatly appreciate that.
So with that, I would like to thank my guests, Dr. Chu Han Yi and Klinsen Soh, for their time today. Thank you all for listening in. See you on the next episode of On Diversity. On Diversity is a podcast inspired by the Institute of Policy Studies Managing Diversity's research program. We are available on all major podcast platforms. Please follow or subscribe to get notified when we have a new episode. You can visit our website, ipscommons.sg, for more information.